Let's take a look at how to get started using the Python programming language. We're going to look at 3 different tools for accessing Python. So an IDE is an integrated development environment. There are some desktop IDEs available to use with Python. There's Idle, Pycharm, Visual Studio, lots of others. These are the most common. And then there's a web-based IDE called Replit. So the first question when we're getting ready to use Python is, do we want to download and install, or do we want to use a web version? There are pros and cons to each. We'll talk a little bit about each of those. If for some reason you choose not to, or you cannot install software on your computer, the Replit site has many programming languages available. We're only going to focus on Python here, but the similar situation exists for other languages. To use Replit, you create a free user account, and then you have access, as I said, to many different languages. Some very common, popular languages, and then some much more esoteric or kind of niche languages as well. So with Replit, you create your account, and you can click See All Templates to see the available languages if none are showing. You select Python, and when you do this, it will open an environment that has access to different aspects. So on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a default program called main. You can change that name, but the Replit is looking for a main file. Typically, what will happen is a normal type of program, especially things that we'll be writing together, can all be in one file. And so you have that default file. In other cases, things get more complicated, and so you might have additional files and then drawing information from different files to do a more complex task. The actual code is typed in the center portion of the screen there. When you run the code, or when you want to run the code, you click Run, and then the code is output on the output screen on the right-hand side. The nice thing about this is you have access to the file from anywhere. You can go back, you can log back into your Replit, work on a file from somewhere else at any time, and then when you're running it, it's also being run on the site. If you want to share this code with someone else being able to work on it or see it or help you out, then you can share the code with the button in the upper right-hand corner. With Idle, which is the default IDE that comes with Python, you go to python.org, you download the most recent version of now Python 3. Download. It's usually a completely straightforward download, and there's a beginner's guide that's available if you're new to Python, and you can get started. Otherwise, there's more detail at docs.python.org, and it goes very deep into all of the things that are available and everything. So you can utilize those in lots of different ways. When you download the appropriate version, whichever the most recent version is probably the best bet, run the installer. The default settings for everything that we're going to do, it will be perfectly fine. And in fact, in most scenarios, the default settings are going to be just fine. With Idle, you can configure it to open in an edit window or in the shell. The edit window kind of corresponds to the middle screen in Replit, and the shell kind of corresponds to the right-hand side where output happens. It's not exactly the same, but it's a similar kind of thing. In the edit window, which is shown here, you get a file, you type things don't happen right away. Python is an interpreted language, so it's actually run line by line. And so the idea of this line by line is you can write all the code, save it, and then execute it, and it all happens one line after the other. But in the shell, you could type in a single line and hit enter and see the output of that line immediately. Now you can't save that for future use, but this is a great place to test ideas or experiment with code or see what happens. If I type this, what's going to happen? This is a good place to, especially when we're learning Python, of experimenting, trying things out. So in the different references that you see, often things are done in the shell. So line by line, you type something, you see the immediate feedback or the immediate response of that. But for more complicated or anything more substantial than just one or two lines, then we will write all of the code in a window, in a file, save that, run that. Then you can share that file as you would any other kind of file. If you write lots of Python code or you're going to write more in future, you might want to eventually start using Pycharm. It has lots of nice features. It's a little more complicated. Some things that some are available to an extent in idle, but Pycharm really goes the extra bit. Auto completion of code. If you create a variable and you don't use that variable, then Pycharm will give you an alert. If data types don't match, it will alert you on that. There are lots of fundamental errors that both languages or both environments will point out, but Pycharm will kind of warn you ahead of time, hey, this might be a problem in future. You might want to take a look at it. If you use multiple languages on a regular basis, then an environment like Visual Studio may be helpful. You can switch back and forth between different languages and have access to all of them in one kind of environment. Maybe not simultaneously, although in some situations there are ways to use one language as part of a bigger program with others. But if you are just going to be using Python and you're new to it, then idle or replit will be your best bet. If you have some experience with programming, maybe more experience with Python, then Pycharm might be good. There's some things with Pycharm. It takes a while to load. Idle opens right up. A few other issues with each of them that are pros and cons. If you're doing lots of programming in lots of different languages, then more advanced IDEs may be more appropriate for you as well. With Visual Studio, it's the same interface. It's similar to the idea of like if you are used to word processing and you're used to using a spreadsheet and so on, from the same company, the interfaces are the same. So you, even when you're using a new system that you're not comfortable with or not familiar with, the interface is the same. So you know where to look for things and you know how to do what you need to do. Visual Studio has most of the nice features of Pycharm and some other, again, some other nice features as well. So getting started with a language, the historical requirement is that we print hello world as the very first thing. Again, it's a historical kind of idea. And so in a language like C, the hello world program might look like this. And it takes a while to learn how what all the pieces mean, what all the parts are. And so to write C, you learn the logic and you learn the syntax, and sometimes there's a disconnect there. In Python, the program is print hello world. We'll go into more detail later about the exact format and so on. Now, there's a lot going on behind the scenes there, but as far as the developer or learning how to program, those things are hidden from you. So some things, a lot is happening, but we don't have to see all of that. So Anytime at the end of a video, if you have any questions, feel free to ask the questions in the comments by email or on Discord.